The structural support beam groaned in the darkness, seconds from catastrophic failure. Ethan Walker's hands moved with surgical precision, his headlamp cutting through the dust as he positioned the emergency jack beneath 200 tons of century-old brick. One miscalculation meant death, not just his, but anyone within 3 blocks when the warehouse collapsed. The metal screamed as he engaged the hydraulic system, sweat dripping despite the midnight chill. The beam stabilized. Ethan exhaled, grabbed his tools, and disappeared into the Charleston fog before anyone knew he'd been there. By morning, the woman whose empire he'd saved would turn the entire city upside down searching for the ghost who'd vanished without a trace. Before we begin, if you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you enjoy what unfolds here, hit that like button. Now, let's dive into a story about invisible hands that hold up kingdoms, and the woman who refused to let those hands remain unseen. The late afternoon sun filtered through the shutters of Marguerite's cafe, painting golden stripes across the worn wooden table where Ethan Walker sat hunched over a set of blueprints. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago, untouched beside his laptop, but he didn't notice. His world had narrowed to the structural calculations sprawled across the architectural plans for the renovation of 3 historic row houses on King Street. "You're going to burn a hole through that paper with your eyes," Marguerite said, refilling his cup without asking. The elderly owner had known Ethan since he'd first moved to Charleston 4 years ago, back when grief still clung to him like a second skin. "Thanks, Marge." Ethan glanced at his watch, 2:15 p.m. 15 minutes until he needed to leave for Lily's school. He made a final notation about load-bearing requirements and began rolling up the plans. "That daughter of yours has you trained better than any dog I've ever seen," Marguerite said with a warm smile. "She's 6. The world's terrifying enough without wondering if Dad forgot about you." Ethan's voice carried the weight of experience. He'd learned that lesson the hard way, watching his own father choose work over presence until absence became permanent. He was sliding the blueprints into their protective tube when the cafe door opened with enough force to make the small bell above it sound like an alarm. Ethan didn't look up immediately. Charleston attracted all types, and dramatic entrances were common in the tourist district. But the sudden silence that fell over the cafe made him raise his head. 3 men in dark suits had entered first, their eyes scanning the room with the practiced assessment of professional security. Behind them came a woman who seemed to carry her own gravity, pulling attention toward her whether she wanted it or not. Victoria Langford was 28 years old and looked like she'd been forged from ambition and fire. Her black suit was cut with the kind of precision that whispered custom tailoring, her dark hair pulled back in a style that meant business, not beauty. But it was her eyes that struck Ethan, sharp, intelligent, and currently fixed on him with an intensity that made his survival instincts flare. "Ethan Walker?" Her voice cut across the cafe like a blade. Every head turned toward him. Ethan remained seated, his hand still resting on the blueprint tube. "Depends on who's asking." She crossed the distance between them in 4 strides, her heels clicking against the old hardwood. One of the bodyguards moved to follow, but she held up a hand, stopping him mid-step. "My name is Victoria Langford. I own the warehouse project on Concord Street." She pulled out the chair across from him without waiting for an invitation and sat down. "Last night, someone broke into my construction site and installed temporary structural supports that prevented 200 tons of masonry from collapsing into the street." Ethan's expression remained neutral, but his mind raced. He'd been careful. No cameras, no witnesses, in and out in 40 minutes. "Sounds like you should thank them," he said evenly. "I would, if I knew who they were." Victoria leaned forward, her gaze never wavering. The security footage was conveniently disabled. The night crew saw nothing, but someone left behind a very specific type of hydraulic jack, the kind only used by structural engineers with experience in historic preservation. There are exactly 7 firms in Charleston that own that equipment. Lucky number 7. I called all of them this morning. 6 firms had all their jacks accounted for in their equipment logs. She pulled a photograph from her jacket and placed it on the table. It showed Ethan's hydraulic jack, his company's serial number clearly visible. The 7th firm, Walker Structural Engineering, a one-man operation run out of a home office, didn't answer their phone, so I looked up the owner. She laid down a second photograph, Ethan's driver's license photo, pulled from public records. Then I checked every cafe within walking distance of the construction site, because someone doing an emergency intervention at midnight doesn't drive. They live close. And here you are. Victoria sat back, a hint of satisfaction in her eyes. You're good at disappearing, Mr. Walker, but I'm better at finding people. Marguerite appeared at the table, her protective instincts clearly engaged. Is there a problem here? No problem, Victoria said without looking away from Ethan. I'm just trying to thank the man who saved my project. I think you have the wrong person, Ethan said quietly. He checked his watch again. 2:22 p.m. 8 minutes. Do I? Victoria's smile was sharp. Because the interesting thing about that jack is that it was positioned with absolute precision. The load distribution was perfect. The temporary support intersected with the original load-bearing structure at exactly the right points to prevent cascade failure. That's not luck, Mr. Walker. That's expertise. Like I said, wrong person. Then you won't mind if I report the theft of your equipment to the police. I'm sure they'd be interested in investigating how your jack ended up on my property. It was a bluff, and they both knew it. But it was an effective one. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he spoke. Why do you care? The building's stable, problem solved. Because someone deliberately created that problem. Victoria's voice dropped lower, and for the first time, Ethan heard something beneath the corporate authority, genuine concern. My project manager swears the temporary supports were properly positioned when his crew left yesterday evening. But when the night security guard did his rounds at 11, he heard cracking sounds. By the time I got there at midnight, the entire western wall was leaning 3 inches off vertical. Settling happens in old buildings. Not in 4 hours, and not when the temporary supports have been deliberately moved. She pulled out her phone and showed him a series of photographs. These were taken yesterday at 6 p.m. These were taken at midnight. Ethan studied the images, his engineer's eye automatically analyzing the changes. She was right. The support beams had been repositioned, subtly, but with clear intent. Someone knew enough about structural engineering to create a problem that would look like natural failure to most inspectors. You need to call the city inspector, he said. Get an official investigation. I did. He's scheduled to come out next Thursday. By then, I'll have lost a week of construction time, and half my subcontractors will have moved on to other jobs. Victoria's frustration finally showed through. I need someone who can stabilize the structure now and figure out what's really happening before my entire project collapses, literally and financially. There are bigger firms who are already working for my competitors, or who would take one look at a potential sabotage situation and run for their liability lawyers. Victoria leaned forward again. I need someone who gives a damn about the integrity of the work more than the politics of the contract. Someone who breaks into construction sites at midnight because they can't sleep knowing a building might fall down. Ethan checked his watch. 2:27 p.m. 3 minutes. I can't help you, he said, standing and gathering his belongings. I have to pick up my daughter from school. Victoria blinked, clearly not expecting that response. I'm offering you a contract worth more than your firm probably makes in a year. And I'm telling you, I have to pick up my daughter from school. Ethan's voice was firm, but not unkind. She's 6 years old, and I promised her I'd be there at 2:30. That's non-negotiable. For a moment, Victoria looked like she wanted to argue. Then something shifted in her expression. A flicker of surprise, maybe even respect. What time does she get out of school tomorrow? She asked. 3 p.m. Then meet me at the construction site at 8 a.m. You'll have 7 hours to assess the structure, and I'll make sure you're gone by 2:30. Victoria stood, extending her hand. I'm not asking you to choose between your work and your daughter, Mr. Walker. I'm asking you to help me save a building that's been standing in this city for 130 years. Ethan hesitated, then shook her hand. Her grip was firm, businesslike. 8 a.m. But I'm not promising anything beyond an assessment. Fair enough? Victoria nodded to her security team, and they moved toward the door. But she paused before leaving, glancing back at him. For what it's worth, thank you for last night. Whatever happens tomorrow, you already saved lives. Then she was gone, leaving a wake of whispered conversations and curious stares. Marguerite appeared at Ethan's elbow. Well, that was something. That was a complication I don't need, Ethan muttered, checking his watch one more time. 2:29 p.m. He grabbed his blueprint tube and headed for the door. "You're going to help her, though," Marguerite called after him. It wasn't a question. Ethan didn't answer, but they both knew he would. The afternoon pickup line at Magnolia Elementary School moved with the choreographed chaos of a military operation. Parents jockeyed for position, minivans and SUVs inching forward as teachers shepherded children to waiting vehicles. Ethan had learned the system years ago: arrive by 2:25, park on the street, walk to the designated pickup zone, and wait for Lily's teacher to bring her out. He saw her before she saw him. Lily Walker was a small explosion of energy contained in a 6-year-old body, her dark curls bouncing as she ran toward him with a painting clutched in both hands. "Daddy, look what I made!" She crashed into his legs with the full force of her enthusiasm. Ethan crouched down, examining the painting with appropriate seriousness. It appeared to be a house, or possibly a castle, rendered in enthusiastic primary colors. "That's amazing, Bug. Tell me about it." "It's our house, but I added a tower because every house should have a tower. And that's you and me in the window, and that's—" She paused, her voice dropping slightly. "That's Mommy, up in the clouds, watching us." Ethan's chest tightened. Sarah had been gone for 3 years, but grief still ambushed him in moments like this, when their daughter's innocence collided with loss too big for a child to carry. "Mom would love it," he said softly, kissing the top of her head. "She'd say it's museum quality." "That's what Miss Peterson said, too." Lily brightened immediately, the shadow passing as quickly as it had come. "Can we get ice cream?" "It's Monday. Ice cream is a Friday thing." "But what if it's a special Monday?" "What makes it special?" Lily considered this seriously. "I don't know yet, but maybe if we get ice cream, it will become special." Ethan laughed, standing and taking her hand. "That's some interesting logic, Bug. But the answer's still no. We have mac and cheese at home." "The good kind with the powdered cheese?" "Is there any other kind?" They walked back to his truck, Lily chattering about her day. How Jackson had eaten glue again, how the class hamster had escaped and been found in the cafeteria, how she'd learned to spell encyclopedia, even though she wasn't sure what it meant. Ethan listened with half his attention, the other half already turning over the problem Victoria had presented. Sabotage on a construction site wasn't just dangerous, it was criminal. Someone with structural engineering knowledge had deliberately created a life-threatening situation. The question was why. "Daddy, you're doing the thinking face," Lily said as he buckled her into her booster seat. "What's the thinking face?" "The one where your eyebrows do this." She scrunched her face into an exaggerated frown that made him laugh. "Sorry, Bug, just working through a problem." "Is it a building problem?" "Yeah, the kind where you have to make sure it doesn't fall down." Exactly that kind. Lily nodded sagely. "Buildings should definitely not fall down. That would be bad." "You're absolutely right." Ethan closed her door and walked around to the driver's side, making a mental note to set an alarm for 7 a.m. If he was going to assess Victoria's project, he needed to review the original architectural plans first. The warehouse on Concord Street was a monument to Charleston's industrial past, a massive brick structure built in 1895 to store cotton before it was shipped north. Ethan arrived at 7:45 a.m., giving himself time to walk the perimeter before Victoria showed up. The building was in rough shape, but that was expected for a renovation project. What caught his attention were the temporary supports, or rather, the way they'd been repositioned. Someone had moved them just enough to destabilize the load distribution without making it obvious to a casual observer. "You're early," Victoria's voice came from behind him. Ethan turned to find her approaching with 2 cups of coffee and none of the security detail from yesterday. She was dressed more casually today, jeans, work boots, and a simple button-down shirt that made her look younger and somehow more formidable. "Wanted to see the problem before we talked about solutions," Ethan said, accepting the coffee she offered. "Who has access to this site?" "My project manager, the general contractor, about 30 subcontractors and their crews, the security guard, the city inspector, and probably half the people in this neighborhood who climb the fence after hours." Victoria's frustration was evident. "I've been developing properties since I was 22. I've dealt with cost overruns, permit delays, and contractors who couldn't build a shed without supervision, but I've never had someone actively sabotaging a project. Who benefits if this project fails?" That's the question, isn't it? Victoria pulled out her phone, scrolling through emails. 3 months ago, I bought this property for $8 million. It was a competitive bid. I outbid Castellano Development by $500,000. Marcus Castellano was not happy. Unhappy enough to commit sabotage? Marcus operates in a moral gray area. He's the kind of developer who bribes inspectors and threatens community opposition. But this? She gestured at the building. This is sophisticated. This required someone who understands structural engineering. Ethan set down his coffee and approached the western wall, running his hand along the brick. The supports were moved sometime between 6 p.m. and 11 p.m. yesterday. Your security guard didn't see anything? He's 67 years old and spends most of his shift in the trailer watching television. I keep him employed because he's been with my company for 12 years, but he's not exactly vigilant. What about the project manager? Thomas Reeves. He's been in construction for 30 years, worked on some of the biggest renovations in the city. I trust him completely. Trust is good. Verification is better. Ethan pulled out his own phone, opening a notepad app. I'm going to need access to all the construction logs, the original architectural plans, the engineering reports, and a list of everyone who's been on site in the last month. Victoria smiled slightly. You're taking the job? I'm doing an assessment. If I find evidence of sabotage, you need to bring in the police. And if the police take 6 months to investigate while my project dies, then you make a choice about acceptable risk. Ethan met her eyes. I'm not going to tell you what to do, Ms. Langford, but I'm also not going to participate in anything that puts people in danger. If this building's not safe, it gets shut down. Fair enough. Victoria pulled out a set of keys and handed them to him. The trailer has everything you need. I have a meeting downtown at 10, but I'll be back by noon. I'll be gone by 2:30, Ethan reminded her. I remember. Your daughter comes first. There was something in her voice, not judgment, but curiosity, as if she were trying to understand a language she'd never learned to speak. She left him alone with the building, and Ethan got to work. The construction trailer was organized chaos, blueprints pinned to every wall, filing cabinets stuffed with permits and contracts, a coffee maker that looked like it had survived several wars. Ethan spread the original architectural plans across the main table and began comparing them to the current construction logs. Within an hour, he found the first discrepancy. The temporary support beams specified in the plans were rated for a different load capacity than the ones actually installed. The difference was subtle, maybe 10%, but in structural engineering, 10% could mean the difference between stability and catastrophe. He checked the contractor's invoices. The beams had been supplied by Castellano Industrial Supply. Ethan sat back, processing the implications. If Marcus Castellano wanted to sabotage Victoria's project, having his supply company provide substandard materials would be the perfect cover. The building wouldn't fail immediately. It would degrade over time, creating endless problems that would bleed money and time until Victoria was forced to sell. But proving it would require testing the actual beams, which meant bringing in an independent materials lab. And that meant time Victoria didn't have. He was making notes when the trailer door opened. A man in his 50s entered, built like someone who'd spent decades on construction sites. His face was weathered, his hands scarred from years of physical labor. You must be Walker, the man said, extending a hand. Thomas Reeves, project manager. Ethan shook his hand, noting the firm grip. Victoria mentioned you. 30 years in construction? 32 as of last month. Started as a laborer, worked my way up. Thomas glanced at the blueprints. She tell you what's going on? Someone's playing games with the structural supports. It's more than games, it's sabotage. Thomas pulled up a chair, his voice dropping. I've worked on a dozen projects that competed with Castellano Development. Every single one had problems, inspectors finding violations that didn't exist, materials delivered late or damaged, subcontractors suddenly refusing to work. Marcus has a system. He makes your life hell until you give up or go bankrupt. Why doesn't Victoria report him? To who? The city officials he's been bribing for 20 years? Thomas's laugh was bitter. Marcus owns half the construction industry in Charleston. You don't beat him by playing by the rules. So how do you beat him? You don't. You survive him. Thomas stood, walking to the window that overlooked the warehouse. But Victoria's different. She actually believes in building things that matter. This warehouse could become 100 units of affordable housing in a city where working people can't afford to live anymore. Marcus would tear it down and build luxury condos that sit empty half the year. Ethan joined him at the window. If I prove the materials are substandard, can you get them replaced? If you can prove it fast enough, maybe. But getting an independent lab to test structural steel takes weeks. Not if you know the right lab. Ethan pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts. I worked with a materials testing company in Atlanta when I was with my previous firm. They owe me a favor. If I can get them samples today, they'll have results in 48 hours. Thomas's eyebrows rose. You worked for a firm? Brennan and Associates, senior structural engineer for 8 years. So why are you running a one-man operation now? Ethan was quiet for a moment. My wife got sick, cancer. I needed flexibility to take care of her and our daughter. After she died, I realized I liked being able to leave at 2:30 every day. Thomas nodded slowly, understanding passing between them. Kids change everything, don't they? Yeah, they do. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of raised voices outside. Both men moved to the trailer door, emerging to find Victoria arguing with a man in an expensive suit. Don't care about your schedule, Marcus, Victoria was saying, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. You don't have access to this site anymore. Marcus Castellano was 60 years old and looked like a man who'd spent his life getting exactly what he wanted. He smiled at Victoria with the condescension of someone used to winning. Now, Victoria, let's be reasonable. I'm simply concerned about safety. These old buildings can be dangerous, especially when the structural supports are failing. His eyes drifted to Ethan. Who's this? Another contractor jumping ship? This is Ethan Walker, the structural engineer reviewing your company's work, Victoria said coolly. And he's already found some very interesting discrepancies. Marcus's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Discrepancies? The support beams your company supplied are rated below the specifications in the approved plans, Ethan said evenly. That's a code violation at minimum. At worst, it's criminal negligence. That's a serious accusation. Marcus turned his full attention to Ethan, and there was nothing friendly in his gaze now. I hope you have proof, Mr. Walker. My company's reputation is impeccable. Then you won't mind if I have the beams independently tested. Be my guest, though I should warn you, making false claims about a supplier can result in expensive lawsuits. Marcus shifted his attention back to Victoria. I came here as a courtesy, to offer my assistance if you need it. But if you're going to throw around baseless accusations, I'll leave you to your failing project. He walked away, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. Thomas whistled low. Well, you just made an enemy. He was already an enemy, Victoria said, watching Marcus climb into his Mercedes. At least now he knows we're fighting back. Ethan checked his watch. 12:15 p.m. 2 hours and 15 minutes until he had to leave. I need samples of those beams. Can you have someone cut sections for testing? I'll do it myself, Thomas said. Give me an hour. While Thomas worked, Ethan continued his review of the construction logs. The more he dug, the clearer the pattern became. Every delay, every complication, every accident on the site could be traced back to decisions made or materials supplied by companies connected to Castellano. It was a masterclass in corporate sabotage, sophisticated enough to avoid obvious criminal charges but devastating in its cumulative effect. Victoria returned from her meeting at 1 p.m., finding Ethan surrounded by spreadsheets and annotated blueprints. That's a lot of paper, she said, setting down another cup of coffee. That's a lot of sabotage. Ethan turned his laptop to show her a timeline he'd constructed. Marcus has been undermining this project since the day you bought the property. Every subcontractor who quit, every delayed permit, every failed inspection, they all connect back to him. Victoria studied the timeline, her expression darkening. Can you prove it in court? Maybe, but that would take months and your project would be dead before you won. So what do we do? Ethan was quiet for a moment, thinking through the options. Finally, he said, We fix the building. We make it so structurally sound that no inspector, no matter how corrupt, can find anything wrong. We document everything, bring in independent verification, and we make this project bulletproof. That's going to cost a fortune. Less than letting Marcus win. Ethan met her eyes. You asked me yesterday why I broke into your construction site. The truth is I can't stand seeing buildings fail because of human greed. Architecture is supposed to last, to shelter people, to be part of a city's story. When someone deliberately destroys that, it's not just property damage. It's vandalism against the future. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, studying him. Then she smiled, and it was the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. All right, Mr. Walker, let's build something that lasts. Ethan glanced at his watch, 2:15 p.m. I have to go pick up my daughter. I know. Same time tomorrow? Same time tomorrow. He gathered his things and headed for his truck, already mentally preparing for the battle ahead. Behind him, Victoria stood in the doorway of the construction trailer, watching him leave and wondering how a single father with a one-man engineering firm had become the only person in Charleston she trusted completely. Lily was waiting in the pickup zone when Ethan arrived, her backpack nearly as big as she was. Today's painting featured what appeared to be a dragon, or possibly a very angry lizard. How was your day, Bug? Ethan asked as she climbed into the truck. Jackson ate glue again, and Miss Peterson says he needs to stop because it's not food, but Jackson says it tastes like peppermint. Lily settled into her booster seat with the authority of someone delivering critical intelligence. Also, we learned about fractions, and I don't understand why you would want half of something when you could have the whole thing. That's actually a very good question, Ethan said, pulling into traffic. What do you want for dinner? Can we have breakfast for dinner with pancakes? Pancakes on a Monday? You said Monday wasn't special, so I'm making it special with pancakes. Ethan laughed. That's solid reasoning. Pancakes it is. They drove home to the small house Ethan had bought after Sarah died. A modest 2-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, nothing like the grand homes he'd once designed for wealthy clients. But it had a yard where Lily could play and a porch where he could drink coffee in the mornings, and that was enough. While Lily did her homework at the kitchen table, Ethan made pancakes and thought about structural integrity, not just in buildings, but in lives. The supports that held people up when gravity tried to pull them down. The foundations that kept you stable when everything else shifted. Sarah had been his foundation. When she died, he'd thought he would collapse under the weight of grief and single parenthood. But Lily had become his temporary support, not because she held him up, but because she needed him to stay standing. Now, 3 years later, he was still standing. And maybe, just maybe, he was ready to build something more than just survival. Daddy, you're doing the thinking face again, Lily said around a mouthful of pancake. Sorry, Bug. It's okay. Thinking is important. Miss Peterson says thinking is how we solve problems. Miss Peterson is very smart. She's okay, Lily said with 6-year-old dismissiveness. But you're smarter because you make buildings stay up, and that's harder than teaching fractions. Ethan smiled, filing that compliment away in the mental box where he kept all of Lily's observations about the world. Someday, when she was older, he'd tell her about this conversation and how she'd made structural engineering sound like the most important job in the world. After dinner, they played Go Fish until Lily's bedtime. Then he read her 3 chapters of the book they were working through, a story about a girl who discovered a magical library. Lily fell asleep before the 3rd chapter ended, her small hand curled around his wrist, the way it had been since she was a baby. Ethan carefully extracted himself, turned on her nightlight, and pulled the door almost closed, leaving it open just enough that she could call for him if she woke up. Then he went to his home office and spent the next 3 hours reviewing Victoria's construction project, building a case that would be strong enough to withstand whatever Marcus Castellano threw at them. At midnight, his phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. The beam samples are ready for pickup. Thomas says you know a lab in Atlanta? Ethan typed back. I'll have them picked up first thing tomorrow. Results in 48 hours. Thank you for all of this. Ethan stared at this message for a moment, then replied, Buildings should stay up. That's the job. Is that all this is? A job? He didn't answer that question. Instead, he set down his phone and looked at the blueprint spread across his desk, at the calculations that would prove whether Marcus had deliberately endangered lives, at the foundation of a case that could save Victoria's project or destroy it completely. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tonight, he just needed to make sure the math was right, because in the end, everything came down to whether the supports could hold the weight. and Ethan Walker had spent his entire career making sure they could. The materials testing lab in Atlanta confirmed pickup at 6 a.m., which meant Ethan was on the road by 4:30, driving through the pre-dawn darkness while Lily slept at his neighbor's house. Mrs. Chen had raised 3 kids of her own and treated Lily like a 4th grandchild, which made early morning emergencies possible. Still, Ethan hated disrupting Lily's routine, hated asking for help, hated feeling like he was choosing work over her even when the math said he'd be back before she woke up. He made it to Atlanta by 9, handed over the beam samples with detailed specifications, and was back in Charleston by 1 p.m. Lily never knew he'd been gone, but Victoria did. "You drove to Atlanta and back in one morning?" she asked when he arrived at the construction site at 1:30, giving himself a full hour before pickup time. The lab needed the samples in person, chain of custody matters if this ends up in court. Ethan set down his laptop bag and accepted the sandwich Victoria handed him. "Thanks. I didn't have time for breakfast." "Or lunch, apparently." She sat down on a stack of lumber, watching him with that same analytical intensity he'd noticed the first day. "You know you could have had Thomas ship the samples. And waited 3 days for delivery? We don't have 3 days." Ethan unwrapped the sandwich, turkey and Swiss, exactly what he would have ordered himself. "How did you know what I like?" "You had the same sandwich yesterday at the cafe. I pay attention." Victoria pulled out her own lunch, some kind of salad that looked expensive and unsatisfying. The city inspector moved up his visit. "He's coming Thursday instead of next week." Ethan stopped mid-bite. "That's in 2 days." "Marcus called in a favor. He wants this building condemned before we can prove the materials are substandard." Victoria's voice was calm, but her knuckles were white around her fork. "If the inspector finds structural issues, he can red tag the entire project. We'd be shut down for months." "Then we make sure he doesn't find anything." Ethan pulled out his laptop, opening the structural analysis he'd been working on since midnight. "I've recalculated the load distribution for the entire building. If we reposition the temporary supports tonight and reinforce the western wall, the structure will be sound enough to pass any inspection." "Can it be done in 2 days?" "If we work through the night, yes, but I'll need Thomas and a crew who know what they're doing." Victoria was already pulling out her phone. "Thomas can have a team here in an hour. What else do you need?" "Coffee. A lot of coffee." Ethan checked his watch. 1:45 p.m. 45 minutes until he had to leave. "And I need you to trust me on something." "What?" "When the inspector comes, he's going to look for any excuse to fail this building. That means every calculation has to be perfect. Every support has to be exactly where it should be. And every piece of documentation has to be flawless." Ethan met her eyes. "I can give you that. But it's going to cost more than you budgeted, and it's going to require bringing in additional engineers to verify my work independently." "How much more?" "Probably $50,000 for the materials and labor, another $20,000 for the independent verification." Victoria didn't hesitate. "Do it." "Just like that?" "Just like that?" She stood, brushing sawdust off her jeans. "I told you yesterday, I need someone who cares about the integrity of the work. You just drove 8 hours round trip to hand-deliver beam samples because chain of custody matters. That's not someone I'm going to second-guess on cost." Ethan felt something shift in his chest, some old defense mechanism recognizing that it wasn't needed here. "I'll have the work order ready by tomorrow morning. I'll have the check ready by tomorrow afternoon." Victoria glanced at her own watch. "You should get going. School pickup waits for no one." He packed up his laptop, trying to ignore how strange it felt to have someone else tracking his schedule, anticipating his needs. In the 3 years since Sarah died, he'd gotten used to being the only one who remembered that Lily needed to be picked up at 2:30, that she liked her sandwiches cut diagonally, that she was afraid of thunderstorms, but only when she was trying to sleep. Having Victoria notice felt like letting someone into a space he'd kept locked. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked as he headed for his truck. "Actually, I'll be here at 6 a.m. If we're working through the night, I want to supervise the support repositioning personally." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "What about your daughter?" "Mrs. Chen can get her to school. I'll be done by 2:30 like always." "You're going to work a 12-hour overnight shift and then show up for a full day the next day?" "I've done worse." Ethan opened his truck door, then paused. "When Sarah was sick, I worked full-time, took care of Lily, and spent every night at the hospital. You learn to function on 4 hours of sleep." "That sounds terrible." "It was. But it taught me what actually matters. He climbed into the truck, starting the engine. Buildings can wait, kids can't. He drove away, leaving Victoria standing in the construction site, wondering how someone could be so completely dedicated to both his work and his daughter without shortchanging either. In her world, success meant sacrifice. You chose career or family, ambition or relationships, empire or humanity. But Ethan Walker seemed to have found a way to choose both. And that fascinated her more than she wanted to admit. The afternoon pickup went smoothly, with Lily chattering about how the class hamster had gotten into the art supplies and was now partially covered in glitter. They went home, had dinner, spaghetti this time, with the sauce Lily insisted on making herself even though it meant tomato sauce on every available surface, and settled into their evening routine. But at 8 p.m., after Lily was asleep, Ethan's phone rang. "We have a problem," Thomas said without preamble. "The crew I hired for tonight just called. They're not coming." "Why not?" "Because Marcus Castellano offered them double rate to work one of his projects instead. All 5 guys gone." Ethan closed his eyes, calculating options. "Can you get another crew?" "Not on 12 hours' notice. Not in Charleston. Marcus has made it very clear that anyone who works for Victoria will never work in this city again." "That's illegal." "So is sabotaging construction sites, but here we are." Thomas's frustration bled through the phone. "I can do the work myself, but not fast enough. We needed 5 guys working through the night. One old man with a bad knee isn't going to cut it." Ethan thought about the inspector coming in 2 days, about the building that would fail without proper support, about Victoria's project collapsing because Marcus had more leverage than she did. Then he thought about his promise to Lily, about being there at 2:30, about the foundation of trust he'd built with her over 3 years of never, ever letting work come first. "I'll be there in an hour," he said quietly. "Ethan, you can't work all night, and then I'll figure it out. Just get the materials ready." He hung up and stood in his home office, staring at the photo on his desk. Sarah smiled back at him, holding infant Lily in the hospital, both of them exhausted and perfect. He could almost hear her voice. "You can't save everyone, Ethan. Sometimes you have to let things fall." But Sarah had also been the one who taught him that some things were worth the sacrifice, that integrity mattered more than convenience, that the world needed people who gave a damn when it would have been easier to walk away. He made a phone call. "Mrs. Chen, I know it's late, but I need a favor." An hour later, he was back at the construction site, wearing work clothes and carrying a thermos of coffee strong enough to strip paint. Thomas was already there, having hauled the new support beams into position with a forklift. "You didn't have to come," Thomas said, but there was relief in his voice. "Yeah, I did." Ethan set down his thermos and grabbed a welding mask. "Let's get to work." They worked through the night, 2 men doing the job of 5, repositioning supports with the precision of surgeons. Thomas had the experience, the muscle memory of decades in construction. Ethan had the engineering knowledge, the ability to calculate load distribution in his head and adjust on the fly when reality didn't match the blueprints. Around 2 a.m., Victoria showed up with more coffee and sandwiches. "You're supposed to be sleeping," Ethan said, his voice muffled behind the welding mask. "So are you." She handed him a sandwich. "I couldn't sleep knowing you 2 were here alone." "We're not alone. We have structural steel and the threat of building collapse to keep us company." Thomas accepted his own sandwich with a nod of thanks. "Your company's better, though." They took a 15-minute break, sitting on the floor of the warehouse and eating in comfortable silence. Ethan noticed Victoria had changed into jeans and a sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. Without the corporate armor, she looked younger, more human. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said suddenly. "Sure." "Why did you leave Brennan and Associates? You said it was for flexibility, but that's not the whole story, is it?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, debating how much to share. Finally, he said, "I was their senior structural engineer. I worked on projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars. When Sarah got sick, I asked for a reduced schedule so I could take her to treatments. They said no, said the projects couldn't wait. So you quit." "So I quit. And I started my own firm where the only person who could tell me the projects couldn't wait was me." He took a long drink of coffee. "Turns out the projects could wait. The buildings got built. The only difference was I got to be there when my wife needed me. Victoria absorbed this, her expression thoughtful. Do you regret it? Walking away from that kind of career? I regret that I had to make that choice at all, but no, I don't regret choosing my family. Ethan stood, stretching muscles that were already starting to protest the physical labor. The world has plenty of engineers. Lily only has one father. They went back to work, and Victoria stayed, handing them tools and holding flashlights and generally making herself useful in the way of someone who'd grown up on construction sites. Around 4 a.m., Thomas asked her about it. My grandfather was a contractor, Victoria said, steadying a support beam while Ethan welded it into place. He started with nothing, built houses for working families. My father turned the company into commercial development. I inherited it when I was 22 and turned it into an empire. Do you miss the houses? Thomas asked. Every day. Victoria's voice was soft. My grandfather built homes where people raised families. I build office towers where people work too much and die too young. This warehouse project is the first time in 6 years I've developed something that will actually help people instead of just generating profit. So why do it? Ethan asked. Why build the office towers if you hate them? Because someone has to prove that women can run empires too. Because every time I tried to step back, someone assumed I was weak. Because I thought success meant being bigger, richer, more powerful than everyone who doubted me. She paused. But lately, I've been wondering if I won that race by running in the wrong direction. The vulnerability in her voice surprised Ethan. In all their interactions, Victoria had been sharp, certain, armored. This version of her, tired and honest at 4 a.m, felt more real. It's not too late to change direction, he said quietly. Isn't it? I've built a company that requires me to be ruthless. If I suddenly start caring about people over profit, the whole thing collapses. Buildings are designed to handle stress, Ethan said, checking the alignment of the beam. But they're also designed to flex. The ones that survive aren't the hardest. They're the ones that know when to bend. Well, Victoria smiled. Is that engineering wisdom or life advice? Both. By 6 a.m., the temporary supports were repositioned, the western wall was reinforced, and the building was structurally sound. Thomas called in the independent engineers for an 8 a.m. verification, and Ethan finally let himself acknowledge how exhausted he was. You should go home and sleep, Victoria said, watching him pack up his tools. Can't. I need to review the verification results and prepare documentation for the inspector. Ethan checked his watch. 6:15 a.m. 8 hours and 15 minutes until school pickup. He could do this. He'd done worse. Ethan, you've been awake for over 24 hours. I've been awake longer. During Sarah's last month, I didn't sleep more than 2 hours a night for 3 weeks. He closed his toolbox, the exhaustion making him more honest than he meant to be. I know my limits. I'm nowhere near them yet. Victoria stepped closer, and for a moment he thought she might argue. Instead, she said, Thank you. For this. For all of it. Buildings should stay up, Ethan said automatically. It's more than that, and you know it. Victoria's eyes held his. You could have walked away. You had every reason to, but you're here at 6 a.m, running on coffee and stubbornness, because you believe this project matters. It does matter. 100 families are going to live here. That's worth losing sleep over. The independent engineers arrived at 8, a team of 3 who spent 2 hours examining every support, every calculation, every structural element. Ethan walked them through the work, answered their questions, and tried not to think about how much he wanted to close his eyes just for a minute. At 10 a.m., the lead engineer signed off on the verification report. This is some of the cleanest structural work I've seen in 20 years. Whatever you paid this guy, it wasn't enough. Victoria smiled. I'm beginning to realize that. Ethan spent the next 4 hours preparing the documentation package for the inspector. Every calculation, every specification, every verification report, all cross-referenced and indexed and prepared for the most hostile review possible. At 2 p.m., he printed the final report, loaded it into his truck, and drove to Magnolia Elementary School. Lily was waiting in the pickup zone, covered in what appeared to be paint and possibly glue. We did art today, she announced, climbing into the truck. I made a sculpture of you, but then Jackson sat on it, so now it's a sculpture of a pancake. That's very abstract, Ethan said, trying to focus on the road despite the way his vision kept blurring at the edges.
Daddy, you look tired.
I am tired, Bug. I worked all night. Lily frowned, her 6-year-old face serious. You're not supposed to work all night. That's when you sleep. Usually, yes, but sometimes there are emergencies. Did a building try to fall down again? Yeah, but we caught it. Good. Lily settled back in her seat, apparently satisfied. Can we have pizza for dinner? Because I think after you catch a building, you deserve pizza. Ethan laughed, the sound surprising him. That's very thoughtful of you, Bug. Pizza it is. They stopped at their favorite pizzeria, picked up a large pepperoni, and went home. Ethan made it through dinner on pure willpower, listened to Lily's chatter about her day, helped her with her homework, and read exactly 2 paragraphs of their bedtime book before Lily gently took it from his hands. You're falling asleep, Daddy. I'm not, Ethan protested, even as his eyes closed. It's okay. I can read to myself tonight. Lily's small hand patted his arm. You go to bed. I'll turn off the lights. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to maintain the routine, wanted to be the parent who took care of everything. But exhaustion had finally caught up with him, and all he could do was kiss Lily's forehead and stumble to his own bedroom. He was asleep before his head hit the pillow. He woke at midnight to his phone buzzing, a text from Victoria. Can't sleep. Keep thinking about what you said, about buildings needing to flex. Is that really true? Ethan typed back with clumsy fingers. It's how they survive earthquakes. The rigid ones crack. The flexible ones bend and snap back. What if you've been rigid for so long you forgot how to bend? Then you start small, flex a little, see if you break. Usually, you don't. There was a long pause, then, thank you for everything. Get some sleep. Already did. 6 whole hours. Show off. Ethan smiled at his phone, then set it down and went back to sleep. When he woke again at 6 a.m., he felt almost human. He made Lily breakfast, got her to school, and was at the construction site by 9, ready for whatever the inspector would throw at them. The inspector arrived at 10 a.m. sharp, a severe man in his 50s who looked like he'd never approved anything in his life. His name was Richard Morrison, and Thomas muttered that he was one of Marcus's guys as they watched him approach. Ms. Langford, Morrison said with cold politeness, I'm here to conduct a structural safety inspection of this property. Of course, Victoria gestured to Ethan. This is Ethan Walker, the structural engineer for the project. He's prepared a complete documentation package for your review. Morrison barely glanced at Ethan. I'll conduct my own inspection, thank you. For the next 3 hours, Morrison examined every inch of the building with the dedication of someone determined to find problems. He measured support beams, tested load capacities, examined welds, and reviewed calculations with the kind of scrutiny usually reserved for criminal evidence. Ethan followed him through the inspection, answering questions and providing additional documentation when requested. Morrison's hostility was obvious, but so was his growing frustration. There was nothing wrong with the building, nothing he could cite, nothing he could fail, nothing he could use to shut down the project. Finally, at 1 p.m., Morrison stood in the center of the warehouse and flipped through his inspection notes one more time. The temporary supports appear adequate, he said, the words clearly bitter in his mouth. The load distribution calculations are within acceptable parameters. The structural integrity meets current code requirements. Victoria and Thomas exchanged a glance. Ethan remained expressionless. However, Morrison continued, and Ethan's stomach sank. I'll need to verify the materials certifications for the steel beams. I'll require independent testing to confirm they meet the specified grade. Already done. Ethan pulled out the Atlanta lab report, handing it to Morrison. Independent materials testing completed 2 days ago. The beams exceed the specified requirements by 12%. Morrison's face went through several interesting colors as he read the report. It was thorough, professional, and completely undermined any claim of substandard materials. This is highly irregular, Morrison said finally. It's highly thorough, Victoria corrected. We wanted to ensure there were no questions about structural integrity. Morrison knew when he was beaten. I'll file my report with the city. The building is approved for continued construction. He left without another word, and the moment his car pulled away, Thomas let out a whoop of victory. We did it! That son of a gun couldn't find a damn thing wrong. Victoria was smiling, really smiling, for the first time since Ethan had met her. We did it, she repeated, then turned to Ethan. You did it. We all did it, Ethan said, but he was smiling too. Though I have to admit I wasn't sure he'd actually approve it. Morrison looked like he wanted to condemn the building out of spite. He would have if you'd given him anything to work with. But you didn't. Victoria's expression turned serious. This project would be dead without you. You know that, right? Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. I just did the engineering. You drove to Atlanta and back in one morning. You worked through the night with Thomas. You prepared documentation that could survive the most hostile inspection in the city's history. That's not just engineering, Ethan. That's dedication. Before he could respond, his phone rang. Mrs. Chen's number. Excuse me, he said, stepping away to answer. Mrs. Chen, everything okay? Lily's fine, but the school nurse called. She has a fever and they need someone to pick her up. Ethan checked his watch. 1:15 p.m. He could make it to the school in 20 minutes. I'm on my way. He hung up and turned to Victoria. I have to go. Lily's sick. Of course. Go. Victoria waved him toward his truck. We've got everything under control here. Ethan grabbed his bag and headed out, but Victoria called after him. Ethan? He turned back. Tomorrow. Take the day off. Spend it with your daughter. The building's not going anywhere. I have to prepare for the materials installation on Monday. Which can wait until Saturday. Take tomorrow. That's not a request. Ethan wanted to argue, but the concern in Victoria's voice stopped him. Okay, thank you. He drove to the school, collected a miserable Lily, who was running a temperature of 101, and spent the rest of the day administering children's medicine and playing quiet games on the couch. By evening, her fever had broken, and she was demanding mac and cheese, which Ethan took as a sign of recovery. Daddy? She said as he tucked her into bed that night. Yeah, Bug? I'm glad you came to get me when I was sick. Of course I came. I'll always come when you need me. I know. Lily's eyes were already heavy with sleep. That's why you're the best daddy in the whole world. Ethan kissed her forehead, his chest tight with emotion he couldn't quite name. Get some sleep, Bug. I'll be right here if you need me. He left her door cracked open and went to his office, intending to do just an hour of work before bed. But his phone buzzed with another text from Victoria. How's Lily? Better. Fever broke. She'll be fine. Good. And you're taking tomorrow off, right? Right. Liar. I bet you're in your office right now. Ethan looked around guiltily. How did you know? Because I'm in my office too. Apparently neither of us knows how to stop working. It's a problem, Ethan admitted. Maybe we should both try to fix it. I'll make you a deal. I'll leave my office if you leave yours. What if I don't believe you? Then I'll send you proof. 30 seconds later, a photo arrived showing Victoria's empty desk with a note that read, Gone home, in her handwriting. Ethan laughed and sent back a photo of his own office, lights off, door closed. See? We can both learn to flex a little. Baby steps, Victoria replied. Get some rest, Ethan. You earned it. He did rest, finally allowing himself a full night's sleep without setting alarms or planning tomorrow's work. And when he woke Friday morning with Lily bouncing on his bed demanding pancakes, he realized Victoria was right. The building would wait. But childhood wouldn't. Friday morning arrived with the kind of golden sunlight that made Charleston look like a postcard, and Ethan kept his promise to Victoria. He made pancakes with Lily, let her dump an inadvisable amount of syrup on them, and spent the morning at the park watching her conquer the monkey bars with the determination of someone scaling Everest. By noon, her fever was a distant memory, replaced by the boundless energy that made 6-year-olds seem like they ran on some alternative fuel source unknown to adults. Can we get ice cream? Lily asked as they walked back to the truck, her hand sticky in his. It's Friday, Ethan said, pretending to consider it seriously. Ice cream is definitely a Friday thing. I knew it, Lily pumped her fist in victory. Can I get 2 scoops? Don't push your luck, Bug. They were in line at the ice cream shop when Ethan's phone rang. He almost didn't answer, committed to this day off, but the caller ID showed Thomas's number and something about the timing felt urgent. This is Ethan. We've got a situation. Thomas's voice was tight. Marcus showed up at the site with a crew. He's claiming there's a lien on the property and he has the right to take possession of the building materials. Ethan's stomach dropped. That's not possible. Victoria owns the property free and clear. That's what I told him, but he's got paperwork that says otherwise, and the police won't intervene in a civil dispute. He's loading our steel beams onto trucks right now. I'm 20 minutes away. Don't let him take anything until I get there. Ethan, he's got 8 guys with him. I can't stall him. I'm coming. He hung up and looked down at Lily, who was watching him with those 2 perceptive eyes that saw everything. The building's trying to fall down again? She asked. Something like that. Ethan crouched to her level. Bug, I know it's Friday, and I promised we'd spend the day together, but I need to go fix something really important. It'll take maybe an hour. Lily's face fell, and Ethan felt it like a knife to the chest. She didn't cry, didn't throw a tantrum. She just looked disappointed in a way that was somehow worse. You said we'd get ice cream, she said quietly. And we will, I promise. But first I need to… He stopped, actually hearing himself. How many times had his own father said those exact words? How many promises delayed became promises broken? Ethan pulled out his phone and called Victoria. Hey, she answered, sounding relaxed in a way he hadn't heard before. You're supposed to be on day off duty. Marcus is at the construction site claiming he has a lien on the property. He's taking the steel beams. The relaxation vanished from Victoria's voice. What? That's impossible. I'll be there in 15 minutes. I can't. I'm with Lily, and I promised her ice cream. The words felt strange in his mouth, choosing his daughter over a crisis, but also right in a way that settled something in his chest. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Victoria said something that surprised him. Good. Stay with her. I'll handle Marcus. Victoria, you need someone who knows the structural specs. And I need you to teach me that it's okay to have a life outside of crisis management. Stay with your daughter, Ethan. I've got this. She hung up before he could argue, leaving Ethan standing in the ice cream shop with Lily's hand in his and a crisis he was choosing not to solve. Are we still getting ice cream? Lily asked, hope creeping back into her voice. Yeah, Bug, we're getting ice cream. 2 scoops. Really? Really? Because you're right. It's Friday, and Fridays are special. They got their ice cream and sat at a small table by the window, Lily working on a precarious tower of chocolate and strawberry, while Ethan tried not to think about what was happening at the construction site. He lasted 15 minutes before his phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Victoria's here. She's terrifying. Marcus doesn't know what hit him. Despite his anxiety, Ethan smiled. He could picture it perfectly. Victoria in full corporate warrior mode, dismantling Marcus's claims with the precision of a surgeon. Another text arrived, this one from Victoria herself. Lien was forged. Police are on the way. Stop worrying and enjoy your ice cream. How did you know I'm eating ice cream? Because you promised your daughter, and you keep your promises. That's who you are. Ethan set down his phone and focused on Lily, who was explaining the complex social dynamics of first grade with the seriousness of a political analyst. He listened, really listened, and tried not to calculate load-bearing formulas in the back of his mind. They spent the afternoon at the Children's Museum, where Lily built an entire city out of foam blocks and then gleefully destroyed it, like a miniature force of nature. They had dinner at the diner that served breakfast all day, and Lily ordered pancakes for the second time, declaring it the best Friday in recorded history. By the time they got home, Lily was yawning between sentences, her earlier fever having left her more tired than she wanted to admit. Ethan carried her inside, got her into pajamas, and was reading the bedtime story when she interrupted him mid-sentence. Daddy? Yeah, Bug? Today was really fun, even though the building tried to be bad. The building wasn't bad. Some people were being bad to the building. Lily considered this with the philosophical gravity of the very young. Did the lady with the fancy shoes fix it? Ethan blinked. What lady with fancy shoes? The one who came to the cafe and found you. She had really fancy shoes, and she looked at you like you were important. You remember that? I remember everything, Lily said matter-of-factly. Is she your friend? Ethan thought about how to answer that. She's someone I'm helping with a project. But do you like her? I don't really know her yet, Bug. But when you know her, will you like her? Maybe. Why are you asking? Lily was quiet for a moment, picking at her bedsheet. Because Mommy's been gone for a long time. And Miss Peterson says it's okay to have new friends even when you miss old friends. Ethan's throat went tight. Miss Peterson is very smart. And yes, it is okay to have new friends. But that doesn't mean we forget the old ones. I know. I still talk to Mommy sometimes. In my head. Lily's voice was small. Is that weird? Not even a little bit. I talk to her too. What do you say? Usually I tell her about you, about how smart you are, and how brave, and how you're growing up to be an amazing person. Ethan smoothed her hair back from her forehead. And I think she tells me I'm doing okay as a dad. You're doing great as a dad, Lily said firmly, even when you have to catch buildings. Thanks, Bug. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow's Saturday. What's special about Saturday? We'll figure it out when we get there. Lily's eyes were already closing, her small body relaxing into sleep with the ease of the young and secure. Ethan watched her for a moment longer, then turned off the light and headed to his office. His phone showed 6 missed calls from Victoria and a text that simply read, "Call me when you can." He called. "How was ice cream?" she asked immediately. 2 scoops of diplomatic crisis avoidance. How was the lien situation? Resolved with extreme prejudice. The paperwork was forged badly. Marcus apparently thought I wouldn't notice that the notary stamp was from a company that went out of business in 2019. Victoria's voice carried satisfaction. The police arrested his site supervisor for attempted theft, and Marcus himself is currently explaining to his lawyer why he thought this was a good idea. So the steel beams are secure? Sitting exactly where they should be, guarded by 2 very large men Thomas knows from his union days. Marcus won't be coming back. Ethan leaned back in his chair, relief flooding through him. You handled it. I did. And you stayed with your daughter. We both did what we needed to do. I'm not used to having backup. You're not used to having a partner. Victoria's voice softened. But maybe it's time you got used to it. This project is too big for one person, Ethan. I learned that this week. What changed? You did. Or rather, watching you did. There was a rustle on the other end, like she was settling into a chair. I've built my entire career on the idea that asking for help is weakness, that real success means doing everything yourself. But then I watched you drive to Atlanta because you needed the right result, work all night because the timeline demanded it, and walk away from a crisis because your daughter needed ice cream. You're not weak, Ethan. You're the strongest person I know, and you do it by knowing when to ask for help. Ethan didn't know what to say to that. Finally, he managed, You didn't need to handle Marcus alone. You could have broken your promise to a 6-year-old who just wanted ice cream with her dad. That would have solved my problem and created a much bigger one. Victoria paused. I don't have kids. I don't know what that kind of responsibility feels like, but I know what it looks like when someone takes it seriously, and I respect it too much to ask you to compromise it. Most people don't understand that. Most people are idiots. The smile was audible in her voice. Get some sleep, Ethan. Monday we start the real work, installing the permanent supports and getting this building ready for occupancy. I'm going to need my structural engineer at full capacity. I'll be there at 8. I know you will. You keep your promises. After she hung up, Ethan sat in his office for a long time, thinking about partnership and promises, and the strange way Victoria Langford had entered his life like a tornado and somehow made everything more stable instead of less. The weekend passed in the comfortable rhythm of single parenthood. Saturday brought grocery shopping and laundry and Lily's insistence on helping make cookies, which resulted in more flour on the floor than in the bowl, but also in laughter that echoed through the house. Sunday meant the park again, then dinner with Mrs. Chen, who fed them enough food for a week and sent Lily home with a container of homemade dumplings. Monday morning arrived with purpose. Ethan got Lily to school, then drove to the construction site where Victoria was already waiting, flanked by Thomas and a crew of workers who looked significantly more committed than the ones Marcus had poached. New team? Ethan asked, shaking hands with the foreman. Union guys, Thomas said with satisfaction. Marcus can't touch them. They don't care about his threats or his money. They just want to do good work. Then let's give them something good to work on. Ethan pulled out the installation plans he'd finalized over the weekend. The permanent supports go in today. By Friday, this building will be strong enough to survive anything Marcus throws at it. The work was meticulous and demanding. Each support beam had to be positioned with millimeter precision, welded to exact specifications, and tested for load capacity before the next phase could begin. Ethan moved through the site like a conductor leading an orchestra, coordinating between crews, double-checking calculations, and solving problems as they emerged. Victoria watched from the sidelines, taking notes and asking questions that showed she was actually learning the technical aspects. Around noon, she approached Ethan with a tablet showing the project timeline. If we maintain this pace, we'll be ready for final inspection in 3 weeks. That's 2 weeks ahead of schedule. Ahead of schedule means ahead of Marcus's next move, Ethan said, reviewing the timeline. He's going to try something else. Men like that don't accept defeat. Let him try. We're ready this time. She was right. Over the next week, the project transformed from a vulnerable renovation into a fortress of structural integrity. The permanent supports went in flawlessly. The western wall was reinforced with additional bracing, and every system was documented with a level of detail that would satisfy the most paranoid inspector. Marcus made his move on Thursday. Ethan was reviewing weld quality when Thomas pulled him aside, his expression grim. "We've got trouble. The building department just called. They're requiring additional seismic retrofitting before they'll approve occupancy." Seismic retrofitting? We're in Charleston, not California. There's no seismic requirement in the building code. There is now. Emergency ordinance passed this morning applies to all historic renovations over 10,000 square feet. Thomas handed him a printed copy of the ordinance. It's targeted. This is the only building in the city that meets those exact specifications. Ethan read through the ordinance, his engineer's mind immediately recognizing the trap. The retrofitting would require specialized equipment, specific materials, and at least 8 weeks of additional work. It would blow through Victoria's budget and push the project past her financing deadline. "Marcus has someone on the city council," he said quietly. "Has to be. This ordinance appeared out of nowhere, no public comment period, no environmental review. It's tailored specifically to kill this project." Ethan found Victoria in the construction trailer, on the phone with her lawyer. She ended the call when he entered, her expression somewhere between fury and desperation. "Tell me you have good news," she said. "I have a solution. I don't know if it counts as good news." Ethan set down the ordinance and pulled up a structural analysis on his laptop. The seismic retrofitting they're requiring is technically unnecessary. The building's existing structure already exceeds the lateral load requirements for this region, but I can prove that in court, not to a corrupt building department. "So we sue?" "We could. It would take months and cost a fortune you don't have." Ethan opened a different file showing a modified retrofit design. "Or we do the retrofitting, but we do it smart. Instead of the full system they're requiring, we install a simplified version that meets the technical requirements, but costs 70% less and takes 3 weeks instead of 8. Victoria studied the design. "Is it legal?" "It meets every specification in the ordinance. They wrote it badly, assuming we'd have to use the most expensive option. But the ordinance just requires seismic retrofitting. It doesn't specify the method. Will it pass inspection? It'll pass because it's overbuilt for what we actually need. The inspector won't be able to fail it without admitting the ordinance itself is flawed." A slow smile spread across Victoria's face. "You're using their own trap against them." "I'm following the letter of a bad law in a way that exposes how bad it is. There's a difference." "I like your difference." Victoria pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the council member who sponsored this ordinance. I want him on record approving your design before we start work." "He won't approve it. He'll stall, and he'll approve it because I'm going to explain very clearly that if he doesn't, I'll be holding a press conference about how his emergency ordinance is blocking affordable housing for 100 families. Victoria's voice was steel. "Marcus operates in the shadows. He can't survive sunlight, and I'm about to shine a very bright light on this entire situation." She made the call, and Ethan listened as she methodically dismantled the council member's objections with a combination of legal threat and public relations pressure. By the end of the conversation, the man had agreed to fast-track approval of Ethan's modified design. 3 days, Victoria said, hanging up. "We have approval in writing within 3 days, or I go to the press." "You're terrifying when you want to be," Ethan said with genuine admiration. "I learned from watching you work. Precision, pressure, and no wasted effort. She glanced at her watch. It's 2 p.m. Don't you have a school pickup? Yeah. Ethan gathered his laptop and blueprints. Will you be okay here? I've got Thomas and a crew of union workers who think Marcus is the devil. I'm in good hands. Victoria walked him to the door of the trailer. Ethan? He turned back. Thank you for finding the solution, for not giving up when Marcus keeps throwing obstacles at us. Buildings should stay up, Ethan said, the phrase that had become his default response. I know, but this is about more than buildings for you. This is about proving that doing the right thing can actually win. Is that what we're doing? Winning? We're still standing. Marcus keeps swinging, and we keep standing. That's winning in my book. Ethan drove to the school, collected Lily, who was full of news about how the class hamster had learned to open its cage, and spent the afternoon in the comfortable routine that grounded him. But part of his mind was already working through the retrofit design, optimizing it, making it bulletproof. That night, after Lily was asleep, he refined the calculations and sent them to Victoria with a note. This will work. Trust me. Her response came immediately. I do. 2 simple words, but they carried weight. Trust was the foundation that held everything else up. Without it, even the strongest structure would fail. The approval came through on Friday, exactly as Victoria had promised. By Monday morning, Ethan's crew was installing the simplified seismic retrofit, working with the kind of focused efficiency that came from knowing they were beating the system that had tried to beat them. Marcus showed up on Tuesday, accompanied by a city inspector Ethan didn't recognize. They walked through the site together, examining the retrofit with hostile attention, clearly looking for any violation they could cite. Ethan followed them silently, clipboard in hand, ready to provide documentation for every decision. When the inspector questioned a weld specification, Ethan produced the engineering report. When Marcus claimed the lateral bracing was inadequate, Ethan showed him the load calculations that proved otherwise. After an hour, the inspector ran out of objections. The work appears to meet the ordinance requirements, he said reluctantly. Appears to? Victoria had materialized from somewhere, her presence commanding immediate attention. Either it meets the requirements or it doesn't. Which is it? The inspector looked to Marcus, who was staring at the retrofit system like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Finally, Marcus spoke. How did you do this so fast? We had a good engineer, Victoria said simply. This is impossible. The cost alone should have bankrupted me? Should have forced me to sell to you at a loss? Victoria's smile was sharp. You made a mistake, Marcus. You assumed I was alone in this, but I'm not. I have a partner who's smarter than your entire organization, and together we're going to finish this project exactly the way we planned. Marcus's face went through several shades of red. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Victoria pulled out her phone, showing him a document. That's a signed statement from 3 subcontractors you pressured to quit my project. That's documented evidence of the forged lien. And that's a very detailed analysis of how your emergency ordinance violates state housing law. You can keep fighting me, but every move you make from now on will be documented, publicized, and prosecuted. You're bluffing. Try me. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, and something in Victoria's expression must have convinced him she meant every word. He turned and walked away without another word, and the inspector followed quickly, clearly not wanting to be caught in the fallout. Thomas let out a breath he'd been holding. Did that just happen? Did Marcus Castellano actually back down? He didn't back down, Ethan said quietly. He retreated. There's a difference. He'll regroup and come back with something else. Let him, Victoria said, her voice certain. We'll be ready. But Marcus's retreat lasted exactly 4 days before he made his next move. And this time it came from a direction none of them anticipated. Ethan was reviewing the final electrical plans on Saturday morning when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Walker, this is Jennifer Moss from South Carolina Professional Licensing. I'm calling regarding a complaint filed against your engineering license. Ethan's blood went cold. What kind of complaint? A formal ethics violation alleging you performed structural engineering work outside the scope of your license and falsified inspection reports. The complaint was filed by Castellano Development and includes sworn statements from 2 witnesses. That's completely false. Every piece of work I've done on the Concord Street project is documented and verified by independent engineers. I'm sure it is, Mr. Walker. But until we complete our investigation, I'm required to inform you that your license is under review. You'll receive formal notice by certified mail within 3 business days, and you'll have 30 days to respond with your defense. How long does the investigation take? Typically 6 to 8 months. During that time, you're permitted to continue working, but any projects requiring a licensed engineer's seal will need secondary verification. Ethan closed his eyes, understanding the trap immediately. Secondary verification on every project. I'm sorry, Mr. Walker, I'm just following the procedures. If the complaint is baseless, the investigation will clear you completely. In 6 to 8 months. Unfortunately, yes. The board meets quarterly, and there's quite a backlog. After she hung up, Ethan sat in his home office staring at the blueprints scattered across his desk, each one representing work he'd done with absolute integrity. Marcus hadn't been able to destroy the building, so now he was trying to destroy the engineer. He called Victoria. Marcus filed an ethics complaint against my license. It's under review for the next 6 to 8 months. Victoria's response was immediate and creative enough that Ethan was glad Lily was at a sleepover. When she finally stopped cursing, she asked, "Can he do that? Just file a complaint with no evidence?" Anyone can file a complaint. The licensing board has to investigate everyone, even the obviously fraudulent ones. Marcus knows that. He's not trying to get my license revoked. He just wants to tie me up in bureaucratic hell long enough to stall the project. What does this mean for the warehouse? It means every engineering decision I make needs secondary verification from another licensed engineer. That adds time and cost to every single phase of work. Ethan pulled up the project timeline on his laptop. We'll miss our completion deadline by at least 2 months, maybe 3. Which puts us past my financing deadline. Victoria's voice had gone flat, the way it did when she was calculating losses. If we don't complete by the end of June, the construction loan converts to a higher interest rate and the affordable housing subsidies expire. The entire financial model collapses. I know, that's exactly what Marcus is counting on. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Victoria said something that surprised him. "This is my fault. I pulled you into this fight, and now he's coming after your career. He's coming after my career because I'm good at my job, and that threatens him. That's not your fault, Victoria. That's just Marcus being Marcus. But if you hadn't taken this project, then a building would have collapsed, 100 families wouldn't get housing, and Marcus would still be running Charleston like his personal fiefdom. I don't regret the work, Victoria. I just regret that doing the right thing comes with this much collateral damage. There has to be something we can do, some way to fight this." Ethan had been thinking about exactly that since the phone call ended. Actually, there might be. The complaint alleges I falsified inspection reports, right? That's a specific claim that requires specific evidence. If Marcus's witnesses are lying, and they have to be because I've never falsified anything, then we can prove it with the documentation trail. You want to go on offense. I want to make Marcus regret weaponizing the licensing board. If we can prove the complaint is fraudulent, the board doesn't just dismiss it. They investigate who filed it and why. Ethics violations go both ways. I like how you think. Some of the energy returned to Victoria's voice. What do you need? Every piece of documentation from the project, every inspection report, every verification, every email and text message. If we're going to prove Marcus is lying, we need a paper trail that's absolutely bulletproof. You'll have it by Monday morning. Thomas has been documenting everything since the day Marcus started his sabotage campaign. Good, because this fight just got personal. After hanging up, Ethan spent the rest of Saturday compiling his own records, cross-referencing dates and specifications, building a timeline that would prove beyond any doubt that he'd done everything by the book. It was meticulous, tedious work, but it was also clarifying. Every calculation he reviewed, every report he reread, reminded him why he'd become an engineer in the first place, because buildings mattered, and the people inside them mattered more. He was still working when Mrs. Chen brought Lily home on Sunday afternoon, full of stories about the sleepover and demanding they make the same kind of French toast her friend's mom had made. Ethan set aside the licensing investigation and focused on being present, on making French toast with Lily's enthusiastic help, on listening to her chatter about friendship and fairness and why Jackson never learned that glue wasn't food. "Daddy, you're doing the thinking face again," Lily said, catching him mid-worry. "Sorry, Bug, just got some work stuff on my mind." "Is it the bad man who keeps trying to make the building fall down?" Ethan paused in the middle of flipping French toast.
How do you know about that? I heard you talking to Miss Victoria on the phone. You said his name was Marcus, and he was being mean.
Lily's face scrunched up in concentration.
Why doesn't somebody just tell him to stop?
It's complicated, Bug. Grown-up problems usually are. But if he's being mean, he should get in trouble. That's what Miss Peterson says. When Jackson is mean, he has to sit in timeout. I think Marcus needed timeout about 40 years ago.
Then you should give him timeout now. It's never too late to learn to be nice.
Ethan laughed despite himself, pulling Lily into a hug. You're absolutely right. And you know what? We're working on exactly that. Monday morning brought the promised documentation from Thomas. 3 banker's boxes full of reports, invoices, emails, and inspection records organized with military precision. So, Victoria met Ethan at the construction site with coffee and a determination that seemed to radiate from her like heat. I spent yesterday talking to every subcontractor who's worked on this project, she said, handing him the coffee. Marcus's witnesses are Jake Brennan and Scott Morrison. Brennan got fired from the project 2 months ago for showing up drunk, and Morrison never worked here at all. He's one of Marcus's regular contractors. So 1 disgruntled ex-employee and 1 plant. That's not even creative. Ethan opened his laptop, pulling up the licensing complaint. The specific allegation is that I approved structural work that didn't meet code requirements and then falsified the inspection reports to cover it up. They cite 3 instances: the temporary supports, the western wall reinforcement, and the seismic retrofit. All of which have independent verification from engineers who aren't involved in Marcus's network. That's what he didn't count on, that I'd actually do the work right. Ethan scrolled through the documentation. We need sworn statements from the independent engineers confirming their reports are accurate. Then we need to prove Morrison was never on site during any of the work he claims to have witnessed. Security logs, Victoria said immediately. Thomas makes everyone sign in and out. If Morrison claims he was here on specific dates, we can prove he wasn't. Perfect. That's perjury, which means the entire complaint collapses. They spent the next 3 days building their response, and Ethan was struck by how naturally he and Victoria worked together. She had the business acumen and the aggressive legal instinct, while he had the technical expertise and the methodical documentation habits. Together, they built a case that didn't just defend against Marcus's allegations, it exposed the entire pattern of harassment and sabotage. On Thursday, Ethan submitted his response to the licensing board with a cover letter that politely suggested they might want to investigate who was actually committing ethics violations. He sent copies to Victoria, to his own lawyer, and to the 3 independent engineers who'd verified his work. Then he went to pick up Lily from school and tried not to think about the fact that his entire career was hanging in the balance while a 6-year-old showed him her latest art project, a portrait of their family that included him, Lily, and a stick figure labeled Mommy in Heaven. That's beautiful, Bug, Ethan said, his throat tight. I made one for Miss Victoria, too, Lily said, pulling out another painting. She doesn't have a family in her pictures, so I made her one. The second portrait showed Victoria holding hands with stick figures labeled Daddy and Lily. Ethan stared at it, not sure what to say. Why did you include us in Miss Victoria's family? He asked carefully. Because she's always helping our family, and families help each other. Miss Peterson says that's what makes someone family, not just blood, but helping. Lily looked up at him with those serious eyes that saw too much. Is that wrong? No, Bug. That's not wrong at all. That's actually really thoughtful. Can I give it to her? Ethan thought about Victoria's reaction to being handed a child's painting that declared her part of their family. Then he thought about how she'd responded to every other unexpected thing in this project, with grace and adaptability. Yeah, you can give it to her. I think she'd like that. The opportunity came on Friday when Victoria stopped by the site during Ethan's afternoon shift. She'd been doing that lately, timing her visits so she could wave at Lily during pickup, and Lily had taken to watching for Victoria's car like it was a special event. Miss Victoria! Lily ran over the moment Ethan parked, clutching her painting. I made this for you! Victoria crouched down, accepting the painting with the same seriousness she brought to contract negotiations. She studied it for a long moment, and Ethan saw something complicated cross her face. This is us? Victoria asked, pointing to the stick figures. Uh-huh.
That's you and Daddy and me, because we're a family now. Lily said it with the absolute certainty of someone who hadn't yet learned that families were complicated. Lily, sweetie, Miss Victoria and I are just, Ethan started, but Victoria interrupted him. Thank you, Lily. This is the nicest thing anyone's given me in a very long time. Can I keep it? It's yours! I made it special for you because you don't have family pictures in your office. How do you know what's in my office? Daddy showed me a picture once when we were video calling. Your walls are empty. That's sad. Walls should have pictures of people you love. Victoria glanced at Ethan, who shrugged apologetically. But when she looked back at Lily, her expression was soft in a way Ethan had never seen before. You're absolutely right. Walls should have pictures of people you love. I'm going to put this one right on my desk where I can see it every day. Lily beamed, then threw her arms around Victoria in an impromptu hug that clearly surprised both of them. Victoria froze for just a second before her arms came up to return the embrace, and Ethan saw her eyes close like she was memorizing the moment. When Lily bounced back to the truck to get her backpack, Victoria stood slowly, still holding the painting. I'm sorry, Ethan said quietly. She's 6. She doesn't understand boundaries yet. Don't apologize. That was... Victoria looked down at the painting, at the stick figure family holding hands. I don't think anyone's ever included me in their family before. Not like this. Not freely. Your parents saw me as a successor, not a daughter. My father especially. Everything was about proving I could run the company, be tough enough, smart enough, ruthless enough. There was never time for just being family. She carefully rolled up the painting. This might be the first family portrait I've ever been in. Ethan didn't know what to say to that. The gap between his life and Victoria's seemed impossibly wide in that moment. He had a daughter who drew him into every picture, while Victoria had an empire and empty walls. For what it's worth, he said finally, Lily's judgment of character is usually pretty good. If she thinks you're family, you probably are. Victoria smiled, but there was something melancholy in it. I should let you go. School pickup waits for no one. Victoria. Ethan waited until she looked at him. Thank you for not dismissing what Lily said. She's been through a lot, losing her mom. Having you around has been good for her. Has it been good for you? The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither of them was quite ready to examine. Ethan thought about how his days had changed since Victoria entered his life. How he'd started to look forward to morning coffee at the construction site. How her texts at midnight had become something he anticipated rather than just answered. Yeah, he said quietly. It's been good for me too. Victoria held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded and walked to her car. But Ethan saw her glance down at the painting one more time before she drove away. And he wondered what it meant that a 6-year-old stick figure drawing could make a billionaire's eyes go soft. The licensing board's response came 10 days later, and it wasn't what Marcus had expected. Instead of a protracted investigation, they'd reviewed Ethan's documentation, contacted the independent engineers, and checked the security logs Victoria provided. The complaint was dismissed with prejudice, meaning it couldn't be refiled, and the board had opened an investigation into Castellano Development for filing a fraudulent ethics complaint. They're going after Marcus? Victoria asked when Ethan called to tell her. They're investigating whether he knowingly filed false allegations to harm a competitor. If they prove it, he could lose his contractor's license. Good. Let him see how it feels to have his career threatened. But the victory felt hollow because on the same day the licensing complaint was dismissed, Victoria's financing bank called with bad news. The affordable housing subsidies had been pulled by the city council, citing budget constraints. Without those subsidies, the warehouse project's financial model didn't work. The rents needed to be twice as high, which meant it would no longer serve working families. Ethan found Victoria in the construction trailer that evening, staring at spreadsheets that all told the same story. The numbers didn't work. Marcus got to the city council, she said without looking up. I don't know how, I don't know who, but he got them to kill the subsidies. Can you appeal? To who? The council that just voted against us? The mayor who's been taking campaign contributions from Castellano for 20 years? Victoria closed her laptop with barely controlled violence. He won. We beat him on every technical challenge, every inspection, every attempt at sabotage.
But he went around us and attacked the financing, and I don't have a counter move for that. Ethan sat down across from her, thinking through options. What if you didn't need the subsidies? What if you could make the numbers work at market rate? Then it's not affordable housing anymore. It's just another luxury development, exactly what Marcus would build. What's the point? The point is that 100 families still get housing, just different families. And you can use the profits to fund actual affordable housing somewhere else, somewhere Marcus can't touch it. That's not the same. No, it's not. But it's better than letting the building sit empty or selling it to Marcus at a loss. Ethan pulled out his phone, opening a document he'd been working on. What if there was a third option? What if we could reduce construction costs enough to make affordable housing viable without the subsidies? Victoria looked up, interested despite her frustration. How? We're already at minimum cost for the quality we need. We are for traditional construction methods. But what if we used prefab components for the interior build-out? Modular bathroom units, standardized kitchen assemblies, factory-built mechanical systems. We could cut construction time by 40% and cost by 30%. Prefab has quality issues. Not anymore. The technology's improved significantly in the last 5 years, and I know a company in North Carolina that specializes in high-quality modular components for exactly this kind of project. Ethan showed her the specifications on his phone. They could have units delivered within 6 weeks, installed in 2. We'd still hit the completion deadline, and the cost savings would offset most of the lost subsidies. Victoria studied the specs, and Ethan could see her mind working through the numbers. This could actually work. The rents would be higher than I wanted, but still accessible to working families. And the construction timeline is fast enough that we beat Marcus's strategy. So we pivot. We adapt. We build something different than we planned, but still worth building. You make it sound simple. Buildings teach you that. They never go up exactly according to plan. There's always something: weather, material delays, unexpected ground conditions. Good engineering isn't about following the perfect plan. It's about adapting when reality doesn't cooperate. Victoria was quiet for a moment, then she started laughing. It started small and grew until she was genuinely laughing, the kind of release that comes after weeks of tension. "What's funny?" Ethan asked. "I just realized that you've been teaching me how to build more than buildings. Every time I think we've lost, you show me another way forward. Every time Marcus knocks us down, you find the structural support that lets us stand back up." She shook her head, still smiling. "I've spent 6 years building an empire by being harder than everyone else. But you're teaching me that being flexible is actually stronger. My daughter would say you just need time out to learn to be nice." Your daughter is terrifyingly wise. 6-year-olds usually are. They haven't learned to complicate simple truths yet. Victoria stood, extending her hand across the table. "All right, mister. Walker. Let's build this thing with prefab components and adaptive engineering and whatever else it takes. Because Marcus is right about one thing. I don't know how to quit." Ethan shook her hand, feeling the familiar calluses that came from someone who actually worked construction sites instead of just owning them. "Neither do I. Buildings should stay up. Even when everything's trying to knock them down. Especially then. That's when good engineering matters most." They worked late into the evening, redesigning the interior build-out to accommodate modular components, recalculating costs and timelines, building a new plan from the ashes of the old one. Around 9 p.m., Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen, who had Lily for the evening. A photo showed Lily asleep on Mrs. Chen's couch, holding the worn stuffed rabbit that had been Sarah's last gift to her. Victoria glanced at the photo over his shoulder. "You should go home. Be with her. She's asleep, and Mrs. Chen's happy to keep her overnight if needed. But you'd rather be there when she wakes up." It wasn't a question, and Ethan didn't bother denying it. "Yeah, I would." "Then go. I can finish the cost projections myself." Ethan started to argue, then remembered his own advice about flexibility. "Okay, but I'm coming in early tomorrow to review everything before we present it to the modular company. I'll have coffee ready." He gathered his things, but paused at the trailer door. "Victoria?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for not giving up on this. A lot of people would have walked away by now. A lot of people didn't have a structural engineer willing to drive to Atlanta before dawn and work through the night to prove materials were substandard. You taught me that some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight gets ugly. She smiled. Besides, I made a promise to 100 families. I keep my promises. Learned that from me too? Learned it from watching you keep yours, even when it cost you. Ethan drove home through the quiet Charleston streets, thinking about promises and buildings and the strange way Victoria Langford had become part of his life's architecture. When he quietly let himself into Mrs. Chen's house, he found Lily exactly where the photo had shown her, curled up with her rabbit and sleeping with the complete trust of a child who knew she was safe. He carefully lifted her, thanked Mrs. Chen in whispers, and carried Lily to his truck. She stirred just enough to murmur, "Daddy?" before settling back into sleep against his shoulder. "I'm here, Bug," he whispered back. "I'm always here." And as he drove them home, Ethan realized that was the foundation of everything else. Being there, showing up, keeping promises, even when it was hard. Buildings stayed up because someone did the work. Families stayed together because someone chose to stay. And maybe, just maybe, Victoria was learning the same lesson. One stick figure drawing and one midnight work session at a time. The Modular Component Company sent their technical team 3 days later, and what was supposed to be a simple presentation turned into a 5-hour collaboration session. By the end of it, they'd redesigned the entire interior build-out with a level of efficiency that made even Thomas whistle in appreciation. "This is brilliant," the lead technician said, reviewing Ethan's modified plans. "We've never seen someone integrate our systems with historic preservation requirements this seamlessly. Usually architects fight us on every specification. I'm not an architect. I'm an engineer who cares more about what works than what's traditional." Ethan pointed to a detail on the plans. "Can you deliver the first bathroom modules by the 15th? We can deliver by the 12th if you need them." "The 12th works even better." Ethan glanced at Victoria, who was watching the exchange with barely concealed satisfaction. "That puts us 3 days ahead of the revised timeline." After the technical team left, Victoria pulled Ethan aside. "How did you know they'd be willing to customize their systems?" "Because good companies want to solve problems, not just sell products. I've worked with their parent corporation before. They're more interested in innovation than profit margins." Ethan closed his laptop, checking his watch. 1:15 an hour and 15 minutes before pickup. The real question is whether Marcus is going to let us install these systems without finding some new way to interfere. He's been quiet for 2 weeks. That worries me more than his attacks did. Me too. Men like Marcus don't just give up. Victoria's phone rang, and her expression darkened as she looked at the caller ID. "Speaking of Marcus," she answered on speaker. "What do you want, Marcus?" "I want to make you an offer, Victoria." Marcus's voice was smooth, almost friendly. "I'm prepared to purchase the Concord Street property for $12 million. That's a $4 million profit for you, and you can walk away from this nightmare project with your reputation intact." "My reputation is fine, thanks, and the property's not for sale." "Think about it carefully. You've spent millions already on a project that's hemorrhaging money. The subsidies are gone, your timeline is shot, and you're betting everything on experimental construction methods that might not work. Take the profit and move on." "The methods aren't experimental, they're innovative, and the timeline is exactly where it needs to be." Victoria's voice could have cut steel. "But I appreciate the offer. It's good to know you're desperate enough to overpay for property you spent 6 months trying to sabotage. I'm trying to save you from yourself." "No, you're trying to save yourself from losing. There's a difference." Victoria smiled at Ethan. "My answer is no, Marcus. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a building to finish." She hung up, and Ethan raised his eyebrows. $12 million? That's a generous offer for someone who's been trying to destroy you. It's a desperate offer. He knows we're about to win, and he's trying to buy his way out of losing. Victoria leaned against the desk, her arms crossed. "The question is what he'll do when I refuse." The answer came 48 hours later, and it was worse than either of them imagined. Ethan was reviewing electrical schematics when Thomas burst into the trailer, his face pale. "We've got a problem, a big one." "How big?" Ethan was already standing, grabbing his hard hat. "Investor meeting big. Victoria's financing partners are threatening to pull their backing unless she replaces you as the structural engineer." Ethan's stomach dropped. "On what grounds?" "They received an anonymous report claiming your innovative methods are experimental and high risk. The report includes detailed technical analysis suggesting the modular components won't integrate properly with the historic structure and that the entire building could fail inspection. Thomas handed him a printed document. It's very convincing. It quotes structural engineering journals and cites specific code violations. Ethan scanned the report, his engineer's mind immediately recognizing the sophisticated manipulation. Someone with real technical knowledge had written this, not Marcus himself, but definitely someone Marcus had hired. The allegations were just plausible enough to scare investors who didn't understand the actual engineering. This is fake. Every citation is taken out of context or misapplied to our situation. I know that. Victoria knows that. But the investors don't, and they're spooked. They want an emergency meeting this afternoon at 4 p.m., an hour and a half after school pickup. Ethan felt the familiar pull of competing obligations, the impossible choice between professional crisis and personal promise. Where's Victoria? Already at her office preparing for the meeting. She told me to tell you not to come, that she'll handle the investors herself. Like hell she will. Ethan was already packing his laptop. This report attacks my engineering specifically. I'm the only one who can refute it properly. Ethan, it's at 4. You can't. I know when it is, Thomas. I'll figure it out. He called Mrs. Chen from his truck, explained the emergency, and felt a familiar guilt when she immediately agreed to get Lily from school. Then he called Victoria. You don't have to come to this meeting, she said before he could speak. I can handle the investors. With what? You're brilliant at business, Victoria, but this report is technical engineering. They're using specialized language specifically because they know you can't refute it as effectively as I can. So we'll bring in another engineer to verify your work, which takes time we don't have. The meeting's in 3 hours. I can be there in 2. Ethan was already calculating the drive time to Victoria's downtown office. This is my work they're attacking. I'm not letting you defend it alone. What about Lily? Mrs. Chen's getting her from school. It's handled. Victoria was quiet for a moment. You're choosing the meeting over picking up your daughter. I'm choosing to be there for both of you. Mrs. Chen loves Lily. She's safe and cared for. But you're about to walk into a room full of investors who've been manipulated by false information, and you need backup. Ethan, buildings should stay up, Victoria. That includes the metaphorical ones. I'll be there by 3:30. He made it by 3:15, arriving at Victoria's office building with enough time to review the investor report in detail. Victoria met him in the lobby, looking corporate and intimidating in a way that reminded him of their first meeting at the cafe. Thank you for coming, she said, leading him to the elevator. I know what this costs you. Lily understands. She's 6, but she's not stupid. She knows sometimes grown-ups have to handle emergencies. Does she? Or does she just accept it because she doesn't have a choice? The question hit harder than Ethan expected. He thought about all the times he'd asked Lily to be flexible, to understand, to accept that Daddy had to work. How many of those times had she really understood versus just accepting? Because what else could a 6-year-old do? I'll make it up to her, he said quietly. I know you will. You always do. Victoria pressed the button for the 15th floor. The investors are in the main conference room. There are 5 of them, and they've already made up their minds that you're a liability. We need to change that in the next hour. The conference room was all glass and steel and expensive furniture, designed to intimidate. The 5 investors looked like they'd been cast for the role. 3 men and 2 women, all in their 50s or 60s, all wearing the kind of watches that cost more than Ethan's truck. They barely glanced at him when he entered. Victoria made introductions with professional efficiency. Gentlemen, ladies, this is Ethan Walker, the structural engineer for the Concord Street project. He's here to address the concerns raised in the technical report you received. Miss Langford, with all respect, we didn't request Mr. Walker's presence. This from Robert Chen, the lead investor. Our concern is that your choice of engineer represents an unacceptable risk to our investment. Then you should hear directly from the engineer why that concern is unfounded. Victoria gestured for Ethan to begin. Ethan set his laptop on the conference table and pulled up a presentation he'd assembled during the drive. The report you received claims that integrating modular components with historic masonry creates structural vulnerabilities. That's technically true in some cases, but completely irrelevant to our specific application. Let me show you why. For the next 40 minutes, Ethan walked them through the engineering in detail, the load calculations, the integration specifications, the independent verifications, the building code compliance. He showed them comparison data from similar projects, cited the same journals the fake report had quoted but with proper context, and systematically dismantled every technical allegation. The report claims the temporary to permanent support transition creates a failure point, one of the female investors said, still skeptical. How do you address that? By not having a transition. The permanent supports were installed in phases while the temporary supports remained active. At no point was the building supported by inadequate structure. The temporary supports weren't removed until the permanent system was fully functional and verified by 3 independent engineering firms. Ethan pulled up the verification reports. Every phase was documented and inspected. There is no failure point because there was no transition gap. Who wrote the report we received? Robert Chen asked. It's technically sophisticated. Someone with engineering knowledge created this. Someone Marcus Castellano hired to create plausible-sounding misinformation, Victoria said. This is the same pattern he's used throughout the project, using just enough truth to make the lies believable. That's a serious allegation, Ms. Langford. It's a demonstrable fact, Mr. Chen. Marcus has filed fraudulent ethics complaints, forged property liens, and bribed city officials to obstruct this project. The licensing board is currently investigating him for professional misconduct. Victoria's voice was steel. He can't beat us on the merits, so he's trying to scare you into pulling funding. And it's working, one of the other investors said bluntly. This project has been nothing but problems since day one. Maybe it's time to cut our losses. The only loss you'll take is the opportunity cost of missing a successful project. Ethan closed his laptop, meeting each investor's eyes in turn. I've been a structural engineer for 14 years. I've worked on projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I left a senior position at a major firm to start my own practice because I wanted to do work that mattered more than profit margins. This warehouse will provide housing for 100 families in a city where working people can't afford to live. That matters. And I stake my professional reputation on the fact that it's being built to the highest possible standards. Your professional reputation was recently questioned by an ethics investigation, Robert Chen pointed out. An investigation that was dismissed with prejudice after the licensing board reviewed my documentation and found the complaint was fraudulent. The board is now investigating Marcus Castellano for filing false allegations. Ethan pulled up the dismissal letter on his laptop. I can email you the official decision if you'd like to verify it. The investors exchanged glances, and Ethan could see the calculation happening. They'd come into this meeting ready to pull funding, but he'd systematically removed every technical justification for that decision. Finally, Robert Chen spoke. Mr. Walker, if we continue with this investment, can you guarantee the project will be completed on time and to code? I can guarantee that every structural element will meet or exceed code requirements, that the building will be safe for occupancy, and that I will personally verify every phase of construction. The timeline depends on factors outside my control: weather, material delivery, city inspections. But the engineering will be flawless. That's not exactly a guarantee. No, it's an honest assessment. I don't make promises I can't keep, Mr. Chen, but I can promise you this. If this project fails, it won't be because the engineering wasn't good enough. There was a long silence. Then one of the female investors, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. I looked into you before this meeting, Mr. Walker. You worked on the Brennan Tower project in Atlanta. That building won 3 engineering awards and has had 0 structural issues in 8 years. You clearly know what you're doing. Thank you. So my question is different. Why are you working on this project? You could be making 3 times as much on commercial developments. Why waste your talent on affordable housing? Ethan thought about Lily's painting, about stick figures holding hands, and the simple truth that families help each other. He thought about Sarah telling him that some things mattered more than money. He thought about watching buildings shape people's lives and knowing that shelter was fundamental to everything else. Because buildings aren't just structures. They're where people live, where kids grow up, where families build their futures. And right now, working families in Charleston can't afford that future. This project changes that for 100 families. That's not wasting my talent. That's using it for something that actually matters. The investors were quiet, absorbing this. Then Robert Chen nodded slowly. All right, we'll continue the investment. But if there are any more problems, structural, financial, or otherwise, we're pulling out immediately. Understood? Understood, Victoria said, relief carefully hidden behind her professional mask. Thank you for your continued confidence in the project. The meeting ended and the investors filed out, leaving Ethan and Victoria alone in the glass-walled conference room. Victoria waited until they were gone before letting her shoulders drop. You saved it, she said quietly. I was losing them, and you turned it around completely. You would have figured it out. No, I wouldn't have. I can negotiate contracts and manage budgets and outmaneuver competitors, but I can't explain structural engineering with that kind of authority. You can, Victoria smiled. Also, that speech about buildings mattering, that was either very genuine or very calculated. It was genuine. I meant every word. I know. That's why it worked. She checked her watch, 5:30. You should call your daughter. She's probably wondering where you are. Ethan was already pulling out his phone, but before he could dial, it rang. Mrs. Chen's number. Is everything okay? He answered. Everything's fine, dear, but Lily has a request. She wants to know if Miss Victoria can come to dinner tonight. Ethan looked at Victoria, who had clearly overheard. Mrs. Chen, I don't think... Please, Daddy? Lily's voice came on the line, and Ethan could picture her having taken the phone from Mrs. Chen. I made spaghetti with Mrs. Chen, and there's lots, and I want Miss Victoria to see my room and meet Mr. Fluffles. Who's Mr. Fluffles? Victoria mouthed. Her rabbit, Ethan mouthed back, then into the phone. Bug, Miss Victoria is very busy. Actually, I'm not, Victoria said, loudly enough for Lily to hear. I'd love to come to dinner. Really? Both Lily and Ethan said it simultaneously. Really? I haven't had spaghetti in years, and I've been wanting to meet this famous Mr. Fluffles. Victoria smiled at Ethan's expression. Unless you don't want me to come? It's not that. My house isn't... We're not exactly... Ethan, Victoria's voice was gentle. I've seen you covered in welding dust at 3 a.m. I've watched you eat truck stop sandwiches while reviewing blueprints. I don't care about your house being fancy. I care about having dinner with people I actually like. We like you too, Lily's voice came through the phone. Daddy, tell her to come. Ethan looked at Victoria, at this woman who'd turned his life sideways over the past 2 months, who'd taught him that having backup didn't mean being weak, who'd stood in conference rooms and construction sites fighting for something that mattered, and he made a decision that felt both terrifying and right. Come to dinner, Victoria, please. They picked up Lily together from Mrs. Chen's house, and Ethan watched as his daughter immediately grabbed Victoria's hand and started chattering about her day, about the spaghetti sauce, about Mr. Fluffles' latest escape from his cage. Victoria listened with the same focused attention she brought to engineering reports, asking questions and laughing in all the right places. His house looked smaller with Victoria in it, more worn around the edges. But she didn't seem to notice or care. She complimented Lily's artwork on the refrigerator, admired the fairy lights strung across the living room, and listened seriously as Lily explained the complex social structure of the stuffed animals arranged on her bed. Dinner was chaotic in the way dinners with 6-year-olds always were. Spaghetti sauce on everything, Lily's stories jumping from topic to topic without warning, Mr. Fluffles making a break for freedom and having to be corralled back to his cage. Through it all, Victoria seemed genuinely happy in a way Ethan had never seen her. The corporate armor was completely gone, replaced by someone who laughed at Lily's jokes and didn't mind getting sauce on her expensive blouse. After dinner, Lily insisted on showing Victoria her room properly, which meant a detailed tour of every toy and book and piece of artwork. Ethan watched from the doorway as Victoria sat cross-legged on the floor, listening to Lily explain the difference between her school crayons and her good crayons, and something in his chest shifted. Daddy, can Miss Victoria read bedtime stories with us? Lily asked when the tour was complete. That's up to Miss Victoria. She might need to get home. I'd love to read bedtime stories, Victoria said immediately. So the three of them squeezed onto Lily's bed, and they took turns reading chapters from their current book until Lily's eyes started to droop. Ethan carried her the final steps to being fully asleep, tucked her in, and kissed her forehead. She's wonderful, Victoria whispered as they left the room. She's exhausting and perfect and terrifying, Ethan said, pulling Lily's door mostly closed. Welcome to single parenthood. They moved to the living room and Ethan poured them both coffee from the pot he'd made earlier. Victoria accepted hers and sat on the couch,
looking around at the space that was so fundamentally different from her world. "Thank you for inviting me tonight," she said. "I can't remember the last time I had dinner with a family." "You have family, don't you? Your father is disappointed that I'm wasting my 20s on bleeding heart projects instead of building commercial empires. We have dinner 4 times a year, always at expensive restaurants, always discussing business strategy. There's no spaghetti sauce on the table. There's definitely no stuffed rabbits." Victoria smiled into her coffee. This was different. This was real. "This is my life. It's not glamorous. It's better than glamorous. It's grounded. It's something that matters." She looked at him seriously. "Do you know what I realized tonight? You've built something I don't have, a foundation that isn't about money or power or proving yourself. You've built a home. I built a life with Sarah, and then I rebuilt it after she died. It's not perfect, but it's yours and Lily's, and it's solid in a way my empire isn't." Victoria set down her coffee. "I've been thinking about what you said in the investor meeting, about using your talent for something that matters. I think I've been using my talent for things that don't matter enough. You're building affordable housing. That matters. Now I am. But for 6 years before this project, I built office towers and luxury condos and developments that made me rich without making anyone's life better. I told myself I was proving women could run empires too, but really, I was just building an empire for empire's sake. So change direction. You did it with this project. What if this project is the start of that change? What if instead of going back to commercial development after the warehouse is done, I keep doing projects like this? Affordable housing, community development, buildings that actually serve people instead of just generating profit." Ethan studied her face, seeing the vulnerability beneath the question. "You'd make less money. I'd make enough money, and I'd make a difference. That's starting to feel more important." Victoria met his eyes. "You've been teaching me that all along, haven't you? That the strongest structures aren't the biggest or most expensive. They're the ones built with integrity for people who need them. I've been teaching you structural engineering. The life philosophy came free. It's good philosophy, better than what my father taught me." She paused, then said quietly, "Lily asked me earlier if I was going to be her new mom." Ethan's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. "She what?" "When you were in the kitchen cleaning up, she asked very seriously if I was going to marry you and be her new mom." Victoria's smile was soft. "I told her that grown-ups have to figure these things out slowly, but that I very much liked being her friend." "I'm sorry, she shouldn't have. 6-year-olds don't understand boundaries." "Ethan." Victoria waited until he stopped apologizing. She wasn't out of line. She was honest. Kids are like that. They see something and they name it before adults figure out how to dance around it. And what did she see? That you and I work well together, that I make you smile, that you make me want to be better than I am. Victoria set down her coffee and moved closer. That maybe we're building something here that's about more than just a warehouse project. Ethan's heart was pounding in a way that had nothing to do with structural engineering. "Victoria, I know this is complicated. I know you have Lily to think about, and I know you're still grieving Sarah, and I know I'm probably the last person you expected to care about this way. But I do care. Somewhere between you saving my building at midnight and teaching me that flexibility is strength, I started caring a lot." "I care too," Ethan admitted, "but I can't. Lily has to come first. Always." "I know. That's one of the things I care about." Victoria reached for his hand. "I'm not asking you to choose between us. I'm asking if maybe, eventually, there could be room in your foundation for someone else. Not to replace Sarah, no one could do that, but to be part of what you're building going forward." Ethan looked down at their hands, at the way Victoria's fingers fit between his, at the calluses they both had from different kinds of work that ultimately served the same purpose, building things that lasted. "I don't know how to do this," he said honestly. "I've been alone with Lily for 3 years. I don't know how to let someone else in. Then we figure it out together, slowly, like good engineering, one structural element at a time, testing as we go, making sure the foundation can support the weight. You're using building metaphors now." "You're a terrible influence." Ethan laughed and some of the tension broke. "Okay, we can try, but slowly. And Lily's comfort comes first." "Agreed. No pressure,
No timeline, just seeing what we can build together. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking coffee and not talking about the fact that they were holding hands like teenagers. Eventually, Victoria glanced at her watch and sighed. I should go. It's late and you have early pickup tomorrow. Early everything tomorrow. The modular units arrive at 7 a.m. I'll be there at 6:30 with coffee. Victoria stood and Ethan walked her to the door. She paused on the threshold, looking back at him. Thank you for tonight, for letting me see this part of your life. Thank you for wanting to see it. She kissed his cheek, quick and soft, and then she was gone, her taillights disappearing down the quiet street. Ethan stood in the doorway for a long moment, processing the evening, the conversation, the way his life seemed to be shifting in directions he hadn't planned but somehow felt right. He checked on Lily one more time before bed and found her awake, watching him from under the covers. I saw Miss Victoria kiss you, she said matter-of-factly. You're supposed to be asleep, bug. I was mostly asleep, but then I heard you talking. Lily sat up, serious in the way only 6-year-olds could be. Do you like Miss Victoria the way you liked Mommy? Ethan sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. I like Miss Victoria a lot. She's smart and kind and she makes me laugh. But it's different from how I loved your mom. Does that make sense? Like how I love Mr. Fluffles, but it's different from how I love you? Exactly like that. Different kinds of love for different people. Lily considered this. Would it be okay if I loved Miss Victoria too? Not like Mommy, but like family? Bug? That would be more than okay. That would be wonderful. Good, because I already do. She reads funny voices when she does the characters, and she didn't even care when I got spaghetti sauce on her fancy shirt. Lily lay back down, satisfied. I think Mommy would like her. The comment hit Ethan square in the chest. What makes you say that? Because Mommy always said we should find people who make us better, and Miss Victoria makes you smile more. That's better. Ethan kissed his daughter's forehead, overwhelmed by her wisdom and her generosity and her capacity to make room in her heart for new people without forgetting the old ones. You're pretty smart, Bug. I know, it's genetic. She yawned, already drifting back to sleep. Love you, Daddy. Love you too, Bug. More than buildings. More than buildings that don't fall down. Even more than that. The modular units arrived exactly on schedule, and the installation went flawlessly. Over the next 3 weeks, the warehouse transformed from a construction site into something that looked like actual housing. The prefab bathrooms fit perfectly. The kitchen assemblies integrated seamlessly with the historic structure, and every inspection passed without issue. Marcus made one last attempt to interfere, showing up with a news crew to protest the dangerous experimental construction methods. But the protest backfired spectacularly when Thomas gave the reporters a tour of the building and let them interview the families who'd already been selected for tenancy. The story that aired focused on innovative, affordable housing solutions rather than safety concerns, and Marcus disappeared from the project entirely after that. The final inspection happened on a Friday in late June, with the city's chief building inspector conducting a comprehensive review of every system. Ethan walked him through the structure, answered technical questions, and provided documentation for every specification. When the inspector finally signed off on the certificate of occupancy, Thomas actually hugged Ethan hard enough to lift him off the ground. We did it, Thomas said, his voice rough with emotion. We actually pulled it off. We did, Ethan agreed. Against all odds, and Marcus's best efforts. Victoria had been in meetings all morning, but she arrived just as the inspector was leaving. She took one look at their faces and knew. We passed? We passed, Ethan confirmed. The building is officially approved for occupancy. 100 units of affordable housing completed on time and under budget. Victoria closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, there were tears threatening to spill. I need to call the families. They've been waiting months for this news. Call them, Ethan said. Tell them they're coming home. That evening, Victoria organized an impromptu celebration at the warehouse. The first families came to see their new homes, and Ethan watched as parents walked through units with tears in their eyes, as kids ran through rooms that would be theirs, as people who'd been priced out of Charleston found space to rebuild their lives. Lily had insisted on coming, and she'd made a welcome banner that read, "Buildings should stay up," in crayon letters. She'd hung it in the main lobby, and when Victoria saw it, she laughed so hard she had to sit down. "Out of the mouths of babes," she said, ruffling Lily's hair. "That should be our company motto." "You have a company?" Lily asked. "I do. But I've been thinking about starting a new one. One that only builds things that matter, like this warehouse. Can Daddy work with you? He's really good at making buildings stay up." Victoria glanced at Ethan over Lily's head, something hopeful in her expression. "I was actually hoping to talk to your dad about exactly that." Later, after the families had left and Lily was asleep in the car, Victoria and Ethan sat on the front steps of the warehouse, looking at the building they'd saved together. "I meant what I told Lily," Victoria said. "I want to start a new development company focused exclusively on affordable housing and community projects. And I want you to be my partner, not my contractor, but my actual business partner." Ethan had been expecting this conversation, but hearing it still made his heart race. "Victoria, hear me out before you say no. We work well together. You have the technical expertise and the integrity. I have the business acumen and the capital. Together, we could build a dozen projects like this. 20. We could actually make a difference in this city. What about my independence, my flexibility to be there for Lily? We structure the partnership to protect that. You maintain your own firm for other projects if you want them. You set your own hours. You leave every day at 2:30, no exceptions, no guilt." Victoria turned to face him fully. "I'm not asking you to sacrifice what matters, Ethan. I'm asking you to build something new while keeping what you already have. And the other thing, the personal thing? We take that as slowly as you need. Business partnership first, and we see where the rest goes." Victoria smiled. "I'm a patient woman when something's worth waiting for." Ethan looked at the warehouse, at the lights now glowing in windows that would soon frame family dinners and homework sessions and all the ordinary moments that made houses into homes. He thought about Sarah's voice telling him that some things were worth the risk. He thought about Lily's painting of stick figures holding hands. He thought about foundations that could support more weight than you expected if they were built right. "Okay," he said, "let's build something together." "Really?" "Really, but I have conditions. Lily's schedule is non-negotiable. Family dinner is mandatory at least 4 nights a week. And if you're going to be part of this, you have to accept that sometimes buildings take second place to bedtime stories." I can live with that." Victoria extended her hand. "Partners?" Ethan shook it, then pulled her into a hug that felt like coming home to something he hadn't known he was looking for. Partners. 3 months later, Langford Walker Development opened its doors with a mission statement about building communities instead of just buildings. Their first project was a mixed-use development in North Charleston that would provide housing for 50 families plus retail space for local businesses. Their second was a renovation of an old school building into affordable apartments for teachers. The work was challenging and demanding and sometimes frustrating, but it was also deeply satisfying in a way Ethan's previous career had never been. He was building things that mattered with a partner who understood both his professional standards and his personal priorities. Lily adjusted to having Victoria around with the resilience of children who'd already survived loss and learned that families could be built as well as born. She still drew pictures of Sarah in heaven watching over them, but now the pictures also included Victoria standing beside Ethan, and somehow that felt right, honoring the past while making room for the future. On a Saturday morning in October, Ethan and Victoria took Lily back to the Concord Street warehouse for a tenant appreciation event. The building was fully alive now, filled with the sounds of kids playing in the courtyard, families cooking dinner, people living the ordinary, extraordinary lives that good housing made possible. "Daddy, look!" Lily pointed to a family moving in, the parents carrying boxes while their daughter, about Lily's age, bounced excitedly beside them. "Can I go say hi?" "Go ahead, Bug. We'll be right here." They watched Lily run over and immediately start chattering with the new girl, and Ethan felt Victoria's hand slip into his. "We did this," she said quietly. "We built something that's going to shelter families for the next 100 years. "Buildings should stay up," Ethan said, the phrase that had become their shared philosophy, "even when everything tries to knock them down. Especially then. That's when good engineering matters most." Victoria leaned against his shoulder, and they stood together watching children play in the courtyard of a building that had almost fallen, in a project that had almost failed, in a partnership that had started with a midnight rescue and grown into something neither of them had expected, but both of them needed.
Thank you, Victoria said after a while. For what? For teaching me that the strongest foundations aren't built alone. For showing me that asking for help isn't weakness. For reminding me that buildings exist to serve people, not the other way around. She looked up at him. For letting me be part of your family. You were always part of it, Ethan said. From the moment Lily drew that picture and decided you belonged with us. We just had to catch up to her wisdom. Lily came running back, her new friend in tow.
Daddy, Miss Victoria, this is Emma, and she likes building things too. And can she come over tomorrow to build a fort? Ethan and Victoria exchanged glances, sharing the silent communication of partners who'd learned to read each other. Sure, Bug, Ethan said. Fort building is definitely a Sunday activity. As the girls ran off planning their architectural masterpiece, Victoria laughed. Fort building. That's a new one. Wait until she decides she wants to build a treehouse. That's when things get really interesting. I have absolutely no idea how to build a treehouse. Then I guess I'll have to teach you. That's what partners do. They build things together, even when they don't know how. Victoria kissed him softly, not caring that they were standing in a courtyard full of tenants who would definitely gossip about it later.
I love you, you know, both of you. I know, Ethan said, pulling her closer. We love you too. More than buildings.
More than buildings that don't fall down? Even more than that. Around them, the warehouse stood solid and strong, its century-old brick held up by modern engineering and old-fashioned determination. Families laughed in windows, children played in courtyards, and somewhere in the foundation, invisible supports did the quiet work of keeping everything standing. It wasn't the building Ethan had originally planned to save that midnight when he'd broken into the construction site. It wasn't the project Victoria had thought she'd bought when she outbid Marcus Castellano, but it was exactly what both of them needed, proof that with the right foundation, even the most damaged structures could be saved, and even the loneliest people could find home. Buildings should stay up. And with love and partnership and stubborn commitment to doing the right thing, they would.